My engine has been sitting on this engine stand for quite a while, and it's always seemed pretty sketchy to me. And let's not pay any attention to the fact that I'm only using 3 out of the 4 bolts that are supposed to hold the engine down. It just adds to the sketchiness. So I wanted to build an engine stand, so I went out to my local parts supplier, Home Depot. I'm not going to be around the bush. So I picked up some steel tubing and some small casters. I tried to not break the bank because this stuff is pretty expensive. With the small amount of material that I did end up purchasing, I'm probably at about $110 into this. And keep in mind, you could buy an actual engine cradle already built for about $150. So of course, you got to keep spending money because I had to go to Harbor Freight and buy an engine hoist and a load leveler to be able to get this job done in the first place. It's the main thing that was holding me back all of this time. I wasn't sure if a engine hoist would fit in my small car. Here I have a Nissan Versa Note, and guys, if it fits in my car, it pretty much fits in any car. So here we have the main box right here, and it is about 55 inches. It's always nice when tools assemble themselves, and in no way did it take me 3 hours to shoot 30 seconds of stop motion. Anyway, so here's a load leveler, and as you can see, it came with a pink handle for her pleasure. It pretty much has one job. It's so you could tilt the engine left or right. If you turn the handle one way, it leans one way. If you turn the handle the other way, it leans the other way. Pretty simple. On the left side of the engine here, I'm just going to put the chain on where the engine mount would go. And on the right side, I want to bolt into this hole on the cylinder head, but also on this one on the block. I just think it'll be a lot more secure. And you guys won't believe me, but I actually found this bracket in my garage off of a random car. I don't even know what it's for, but look how perfectly it lines up. I want to say it's a bracket for a power steering pump off of some random car, and it just, what a coincidence that the bolt holes line up perfectly, right? Anyway, I'll take it. So over to the press / brake. I want to go ahead and bend this bracket for 2 reasons. The first one is so that we could get the chain a little bit further away from the valve cover and minimize my chances of scratching it. And the second one is that it'll just make it easier to mount the chain onto the bracket if we have some extra clearance. I need to find a bolt for this bracket so I can put the chain on it, and as you can see, I have a large collection of nuts and bolts here. Now some of you haters are going to say that this whole thing was staged, but that's just not the case, guys. You're going to have to take my word for that. Remember, you saw it on the internet, so it must be true. This lower bolt is the only one that doesn't fit in the bracket. They don't call me the reamer for nothing, so I'm going to get to work.
No, 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 no.
Well, now that that circus is over, I want to go ahead and level the engine, and I'm only concerned with the left to right, not so much front to back. So by the time I'm done building the engine stand, if the engine is leaning towards the front or towards the rear a little bit, that's perfectly fine. I just want the left to right to look more or less level, and I'm just going to use a steel pipe here with my digital level, and this is where the load leveler really comes into play. It makes this job super easy. So all of that looks really good, and this is about the height that I want to keep the engine at when I start making this cradle. You can see the distance between the alternator and the rail of the engine hoist. Now, I did run a tap inside of these holes right here because these are where my bolts are going to go in that are going to support the engine once the cradle is all pretty much assembled. And as you can see, I could now thread in these bolts with my finger, whereas before you had to force them in. There was just so much junk inside of the threads. So I'm cutting off this round tube here, and this is going to be where the bolts are going to go through, and it's pretty much the only round section on this entire frame. After doing some very scientific measuring, I decided that I want the wheels about 22 inches apart on center. So that's what I did here, and the nice thing about this is that these casters are so small that they fit right underneath the rail of the engine hoist, and that's the whole idea of this cradle. I want this thing to be able to slide underneath the engine hoist without any issues, without anything interfering, and it just makes it super easy to put the engine on the cradle without anything else getting in the way. That was the whole purpose for the way I'm designing this cradle. As you saw, I had the bright idea of using zip ties to hold the wheels in place, and they ended up melting off to nobody's surprise. It's not a big deal, they did their job, and I could just go ahead and cut them off now. These are my first welds on this project, and so far everything's looking pretty good, minus the areas where I burned off the zip ties, but that was to be expected. They actually clean off pretty easy. So the welds are looking really good. I'm happy with how it's turning out, so this is going to be a fun project. Well, so far so good. I'm happy with the way those turned out. Now, measuring the length of the engine, again, I went with about 22 inches. So essentially, I'm making a box, but not really. Now, the only thing I have to measure with is a small measuring tape, a long straight edge, and this very tiny machinist square. So it's kind of hard to make things square when I'm using very limited tools. For some reason, I thought I had one of those welding magnets that helps you get things at like a 90-degree angle, and I looked everywhere in my garage, and apparently I don't have one. So I'm trying to make do without it. Now I decided to just give everything a few tacks because I don't want to commit to anything, so I just want to make sure it's all right. Before I put on this last one that's going to box everything in, I want to take it back over to the engine and just kind of measure some more and make sure I got everything in the right place before I really commit to welding everything in fully. One small detail that I want to do was grind out the top of this post because it's going to be where that round bar sits on top, and I just thought it would make it a little bit easier to weld it in place if it has something round to kind of sit into. And now that I got my measurements, I'm going to go ahead and start tacking things in a little bit more until I get everything exactly where I want it. On this round bar, I'm aiming for about 7.4 degree. It doesn't have to be exact, that's just the number I'm aiming for. And I'm actually going to overshoot it just a little bit because I know whenever a weld cools off, it tends to contract. So we can see that right for our eyes, we're at 7.8, and as that weld cools off, you see it's shrinking and pulling the metal. It's actually changing the angle. I thought it was pretty interesting. Now that the two posts are tacked in, let's go ahead and test fit it back on the engine and make sure it's going to work before we completely weld it in. Here goes the two pieces I just cut off, and as you can see, I put a 45 angle on each of them. Okay, it's not really a 45, I just kind of eyeballed it, but you get what I'm trying to do. So since both of the posts are different heights and in different locations, I decided to put a mark 6 inches away from them, and what that does is it makes the two triangles look more or less symmetrical, and that's all I was going for, guys. I just wanted everything to look even. Oh, she's tight like a tiger. So I thought for a while on how I'm going to mount the left side of the engine to the cradle. Now, if you were to buy one of these already pre-made cradles, they usually mount to a block in like 4 locations, and that's a bare block. As you can see, my engine already has a ton of accessories on it, so one of those pre-made cradles wouldn't even fit my application right out the box I would have to start modifying it, cutting and welding things, and I figured if I'm gonna have to modify something, I might as well just make it myself. So I came up with the idea that I'm gonna go ahead and install the left side engine mount, and I'm gonna have one tower coming off of the cradle, and it's gonna bolt up to the engine mount. And I thought it was a pretty neat solution because that means the left side engine mount can stay in place, and whenever I go to lift up this engine with the hoist, that mount is always ready to go. There's no fumbling or anything like that. It's always in place. But the major key here is that this left tower that's going to come off of the cradle can't be welded in like the other two. This one has to be removable, or else it defeats the purpose of having a cradle that could just slide in underneath the engine hoist. Since this side is going to be holding all of the engine on one post, I want to go ahead and stiffen this up by putting down another piece of metal that's going to get welded in place. Then I'm going to put some sort of a plate down like this, and this plate is actually going to get welded to the post, and this is the post that's going to go up to the engine mount. Now this is the only 1-inch square tubing in this whole build, and I wanted something a little bit more heavy duty to be able to withstand the weight, and these little like L brackets are just kind of like locators, if you will. So that's pretty much the idea, and I'm just kind of making it as I go along. And by putting my level on the engine mount here, you could see how the engine front to back isn't level, and that's perfectly fine. I could work around that. I could make the bracket that's going to go to this engine mount at an angle to pretty much work with how I've already set it up. Do you remember when I said I don't have one of those welding magnets? For some reason I thought I had one of those welding magnets that helps you get things at like a 90-degree angle, and I looked everywhere in my garage and apparently I don't have one. You see, I did say that. I went to Home Depot. Unfortunately, they only had the Lincoln Electric brand. Now, I'm all about Team Blue, but I had no choice. I had to buy it. Fine, if it makes you feel any better, there you go. Now it's Team Blue. Just a side note here, if I were to drill a hole through both of these brackets as they sit next to each other on the same plane, the holes wouldn't line up. They would be offset because I'm going to be stacking the brackets just like this. So the way to correct for this is to basically just shim up the bracket that would be on top, and then you could drill right through both of them, and that way when you stack them on top of each other, the holes would align with each other. I hope that makes sense. So at this point, I marked the angle that I have to cut on here. And somehow I messed this up, guys. I have no idea. I mean, I could mess up a bowl of cereal. Milk, cereal, on fire. You get what I'm saying? So I messed it up. I was way off on my angle. I don't know where I went wrong. Maybe it's because my daddy wasn't there. I don't know though. Anyways, so I had to fix it with the welder. It's what I did. I built up some material to give me the right angle that I needed. And of course, I still have a massive gap. But I'll fix that with the welder. And there we have it. Now sure, it looks like a hacked up patch job, but it's solid. If you don't like it, come at me, bro. Because I'm not a fan of loose nuts, I'm just going to go ahead and weld all the nuts in for this job because I don't want to mess with any of that stuff. I just want to screw in the bolts and that'll be it. Yes, I use my drill bits to sweep off metal chips, just like I drink my tea with my pinky in the air. As you can see, the holes are drilled and the bolts go in. They have plenty of clearance, and this had nothing to do at all with the fact that I didn't have the correct size drill bit. Nothing at all. For the tabs on the bottom, I thought it looked more like a finished product if I just round them off. As you can see, the hole on the left is hanging off of the tube, and that's not good. Kind of overshot my mark there. For some reason, I thought I was working with a 1-inch tube underneath it, but that's not right. So I'm just going to use my die grinder and a welder once again to fix this problem. So cue the montage music. And there we have it. This thing's pretty much all done, so let's take it over to the engine and see how easy it is to install. In case you're wondering if I'm going to paint it, yes I will. I just didn't think it was necessary to show you guys because it's just painting, guys. I'm not going to waste your time for any of that. But that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, stick around. We got more stuff coming. Thanks for watching.